Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is our 102nd AV online discussion. My name is Adam Howell, and I'm the Director of External Affairs with Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. Now, as many of you know, or maybe some of you don't, we put out every holiday season an AV-themed holiday gift guide. It's a fun way to show off some of the things that are new and happening out there in the product world and so forth that are AV themed. And this year we decided to include seasons 3 and 4 of the hit TV series Westworld. In particular, because seasons 3 and 4 are such amazing representations of an imaginative look at the potential for fully autonomous vehicles in sort of a near reimagined future. So we are so excited today because to give us some insights into sort of the creative process and how this role came about, we have Victor Martinez, who is a concept designer who worked on Westworld in addition to a lot of other exciting projects in the future space. So Victor, thank you so much for being here. I am just really thrilled.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Well, as you can probably tell from my ear to ear grin, I'm a huge fan of the show. I love not only science fiction and Westworld, but I love any like visual representation of like creative engineering and such. But I'm curious about you personally. How did you get started in this field? Can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Yeah, it's it started, I would say, officially a little over 20 years ago, but it was something that I was always aiming for since I was a little kid and saw Star Wars for the first time and wanted to get into some type of concept design and creative end of filmmaking. But I had just gotten out of graduate school. I was at SciArc, Southern California Institute of Architecture, and I had done a project that involved these kind of autonomous maglev train stations that would connect Los Angeles to San Francisco. And this was part of a studio project. And at the time, not a lot of people were doing digital design. It was just starting to, I'm going to age myself here, because this is in the 90s, right? So digital design and computer aided design was just starting to get into these fields. And I was doing a lot of 3D modeling, which was kind of a newer technology getting into the film industry. My name got passed over to production designer Alex McDowell, who was starting up work on Minority Report. And it just clicked because, as you know, in that film, they had these autonomous maglev vehicles. So seeing that I had worked on that, and because of my background in digital design and him wanting to build kind of a next gen art department, I was able to get in on that film. And then from there, I've been doing that ever since. So originally, I actually came into the industry as a digital set designer, and like I said, doing a lot of 3D modeling. My goal again was to get into concept design, and so it took probably 5-6 years to make that transition, and eventually cross over and do. I've been doing that pretty steadily ever since.
That's awesome. Well, and I do want to just like Minority Report and so many other great things in your portfolio, I want to give a shout out to your website and your work. We'll post a link to it because I think anybody out there would, especially people who are interested in like the future technology, the possibilities of what it can do. There's a lot of cool stuff out there that you've worked on. So I definitely am a fan of all these designs. Now, I'm curious, you talked a little bit about your background. You said iRobot and how you progress into concept design. Where does your story start when you get into Westworld?
So yeah, Westworld, I had finished up, and I think the film had come out. So Blade Runner 2049, which I had worked on, Jonathan Nolan, who's one of the showrunners and creators of Westworld, saw my work, and his office reached out to me. So they called me up and said, Jonah would like you to come in and discuss working on developing this new world for Westworld, which will be leaving the West and entering the world. That's kind of how it was pitched to me. And so it's going to be a lot of kind of not so distant future, but sci-fi, not like Blade Runner, but still touching on some of those themes. The production designer, Howard Cummings, was tied up at the moment on another project. So the production wanted to kind of move forward with laying a groundwork of what this future world could look like. So again, that's why they had me come in, initially kind of pitch some ideas. So it was awesome. I would sit down with Jonah for an hour, once a week, twice a week, and we'd spitball ideas back and forth. And he has such a clear vision, with regards to this, story and how it unfolds and where he wanted to go with it. So he was, already had these ideas obviously in place. And so it was a matter of visualizing this and taking this, these ideas and applying them to the show. And ironically, I had actually never seen the show at that point. So I had a crash course, and I had to binge watch, seasons 1 and 2 to catch up to speed, which I actually think was a good process, because it was, it enabled me to really take it all in as one sort of chunk of information, rather than kind of like, if had I watched it episodically, I probably would have had to go back and revisit. So everything was so fresh in my mind. It really aided me with then approaching what this new world would be. And the whole idea is that as you deconstruct this new world, there's a lot of correlations to the Western world, right? And there are obviously these broader themes of systems and controls and artificial intelligence, and what it is to be human, and what it is to be synthetic, and kind of blurring the lines between this thing, these different things and these different themes. So so that's, I got pulled in to do that. I put together a couple of pitches of ideas, mostly pulling reference and images, covering everything from the environments to various sets, to costumes and props, weapons and stuff like that, and then ultimately the vehicles. So then once we kind of got rolling with this, the production designer Howard was able to come on full time and took the reins of designing the show, and I was moved into focusing on the picture vehicles. So all the cars and then the motorcycle that was being built specifically for the show.
That's amazing, and I'm glad you brought up Blade Runner, because another great movie, and I think about like the contrast between Blade Runner as its own type of aesthetic for the future, but then like the world of Westworld outside of the park, it seems it's very grounded, it's very realistic, on the nose. It's not like dystopian or anything, right? When you see it, it's almost like, I could see myself 20, 30 years, whatever, living in this environment, in this world. And I'm kind of curious, especially when I think of some of the other projects that you've worked on, how did you come up with this much more like grounded, realistic aesthetic? What were some of your inspirations on that side?
Well, what Jonah Nolan told me was specifically he did not want to do the dark dystopian future that we've seen, in Blade Runner and other films. That was kind of a more, I think, familiar, darker future, but he wanted a darker future, but that felt kind of clean and pristine on the surface. And it wasn't until you peeled away and got to the, you know, underworkings of this society that you discovered the darker side of it. So, you know, his idea was that hopefully as we move forward as a society, and that we're creating, you know, not only cleaner fuels or, you know, more advanced technologies that will aid us in our day-to-day, and then how does that apply to you know, how a city is realized. And so we got into these issues, obviously, of transportation and what aesthetically a city is and how people engage with these newer technologies. And, you know, again, the idea was to create a future that felt more like a utopian future than the dystopian. But again, it was, as you know, those who are familiar with the show, it's like things aren't always as they appear to be. And there's always this these things and systems and controls that are happening beneath the surface of what's readily available to you. And so as you get deeper and deeper into this world, you start to understand how, you know, it's been kind of deconstructed. So
It's kind of like the world that was created. It's almost like a host in itself, you know.
and that's, you're spot on. I mean, that's exactly what it's meant to be. And this future city is, you discover it has the same amount of controls and restrictions, and these sort of, you know, evil undercurrents, right, that are existing that may not be apparent on the surface. And you know, as you delve into that, that's what, you know, pulls you into the story, as finding out kind of what's really going on.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like a mystery. It's also, you know, that you got to work for it in terms of like you know, discovering the philosophy and the themes and stuff like that. It's amazing. And you know, with all that going on, with everything that, you know, you and other production designers and Jonathan Nolan and everybody else incorporated into this, I was always really struck as to, again, the realism. I'm curious, did you do any research or background on like AV companies or any groups that are currently in operation, or was this all just conceptual?
No, I mean, it's, and I probably speak for a lot of concept designers, is that, you know, we're always starting with a ton of research. And whether it's research that we do specifically on the show, or whether it's stuff that we just bring in from outside, you know, whether it's our everyday lives or just stuff that we, you know, come across. I think as a good designer and as a good artist, it's your responsibility to really know what's going on in the world, especially if you're dealing with issues of science fiction, right? So there's a level of scientific exploration that needs to be addressed. So you're always cognizant of those things. But then on the flip side, when you're working on film and television productions, you're in a very constrained timetable. So you know, we weren't taking, let's say, field trips to different places where they were working on these. And understandably so, a lot of the places that are working on this stuff, it's very proprietary. So there's a lot of guarded information. So a lot of it is just kind of, you know, as simply as, you know, spending days on Google, pulling down images of stuff and sifting through this and trying to get acclimated to the technology, and then applying what works within the story, within the context of the Westworld as a whole. So it's always interesting though when you know, because again, when I worked on it, it was probably at least a year, maybe 2 years before it actually came out. And within that 1 to 2 years, there was like the Tesla Cybertruck
Oh, yeah.
was announced, right? And we had never seen that, at all during the whole production. But then when you put that side by side with some of the vehicles that we created for the show, they feel very much a part of the same world, right? And it's like, I think as designers, that makes you feel good, because it makes you feel like, okay, we did something right, because it fits into reality. And so there are a lot of these projects, which, funny enough, you put them side by side and you're almost like, oh
Yeah.
my God, that's like exactly like that, or exactly like that. And it's again, it's reassuring, because it tells me and it tells us that we were on the right track. So
Absolutely. And that's, again, you hit the nail on the head in terms of what I thought when I first saw it. It's you know, you you really all had amazing intuition in terms of like, how the technology is planned, how some of the concepts are planned to actually function in real life, in terms of, I think I like the term a marriage of form and function, because when you remove the operational necessity of a human driver, that opens up the interior for other things, like people can sit and face each other and have a conversation. Maybe in the future there will be more luxury elements involved, or like some of the purpose-built vehicles for the show, ambulances and police, they have space on the inside now to have more functionality in there. And you incorporated so much of that in there. And I'm just curious, was that just a conscious decision, having these AVs that are very, very functional on the inside in terms of all the different things that people being conveyed in them can do?
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And speaking, for example, to the autonomous, we called it the rideshare vehicle.
Yeah.
So it's essentially this utilitarian vehicle that Jonah was referencing a lot, the black electric scooters, like the bird scooters that you see thrown all over the city. They're kind of discarded and disposable, but readily available, right? And very utilitarian. And so, he was like, I want this thing to be like matte black, because it's just a utilitarian moving box that transports people around. Right? And then on the interior, we use materials and aesthetics that was about, like, if this was a real car, they need to be able to wipe it down really quick and hose it off.
Right, yeah.
It's no longer about like having a leather interior, right? It's about exploring materials that are sustainable, that are durable, that again are resilient to everyday use. It almost should feel more like the interior of a public bus, right? And then when you spoke about like the configuration of the seating, I was saying that, like, we no longer have a driver, right? We no longer have somebody riding shotgun. There's no reason to be facing down the street. So it makes more sense that if you're getting in and out of this thing, that you have this kind of bench seating. And what that does also is it completely changes the orientation of the rider, right? So you're no longer, again, looking down the street, but you're looking at the side. And that informed how the sidewalks would be designed, and how storefronts and signage, because you can imagine now when you're driving down a boulevard or a freeway, you see billboards that are facing you as you encounter it. You would no longer need that. You would be more facing the sidewalk and seeing the street from a different angle, a different perspective. And again, those little nuances is what really informs the larger design of the show. So when you watch this, you might want to take cues to things like that. And the vehicle itself being this glass bubble, the idea was you need to feel safe when you're in it, because it is essentially a public vehicle that anybody can come in and out of. So being highly visible for safety reasons, but also to make sure that somebody isn't in there committing a crime, doing graffiti or doing something that they shouldn't be. So you feel like you're constantly under surveillance. And I think that also plays into the story as well, this idea of like you're being watched or you're part of a larger spectrum. Right. So, and I actually wanted to push this a little further, I originally proposed that these vehicles would be skinny, like half the width. And instead of seats, you would have like a saddle that you would just stand up and kind of situate yourself in.
Okay.
And the idea was then you could fit like two vehicles in a lane rather than one. So you could have more vehicles. But then, that gets into the idea of you've got a whole infrastructure then that you have to change. You've got garage entries and street widths that potentially, would change. And so you do have these real world constrictions that you have to be cognizant of. And so, we did our best to project like, okay, what realistically could be done. So, we kept the wheelbase the same as a typical car wheelbase would be, but again, making those subtle changes of the seating and just the materials that we use, it really starts to transform the user experience. And because I think the closest that we have today is, calling an Uber or a Lyft, right? You pull out your phone, you've got the app, you're able to call a vehicle to you and it can take you where you want to go. And this is taking it, like 5 generations further from that, where you've kind of eliminated, of course, a driver, and you've eliminated some of these other conventions that we're used to. And then, asking yourself, okay, by doing that and making these subtle changes to the physical play out of the interior of the car, for example, how does that change the world around you? The other thing too is if you look at that vehicle, there's just a subtle difference between the front and the rear, right? And the idea is that it's bi-directional. It can go forward or backwards, and there's no front, there's no rear. It's an electric vehicle. It doesn't have a grille that needs to be facing forward. And the lights, the tail lights would simply change color to white to become the headlight, and the vice versa on the back. The headlight would become the tail light. And so that was part of the discussion too, that you would have these vehicles just kind of moving in and out of the city, and again, changing how we interact with our urban environment and how that changes kind of the urban landscape.
See, now I'm going to go back and look at the orientation of the
I just
billboards
blew
and
your mind.
because I mean, there's lots of things I thought that I noticed, but there's like 5 different things that you mentioned that was just so seamlessly incorporated that I didn't even realize, but that all makes complete sense.
And also look at like the intersections when they're coming, because these are autonomous and they're running off of the same kind of hive mind. You don't need stop signs anymore, right? Because everything can be timed and just move seamlessly. And I think there's a shot, and it appeared, I believe, in the first trailer that came out for the 3rd season, where there's a kind of a over the shoulder, and you see the LA downtown, and you just see these cars zipping by, and they're not, they're coming within inches of each other. And that was another thing that we talked about, that there would be roads for vehicular traffic, but there would be pathways, sidewalks, bridges that for pedestrian traffic, and so you have kind of like a separation. And then also the idea that the city becomes layered vertically, where you would have these sky bridges again, so you're kind of detached from the ground. And so because as a pedestrian, you don't want to be on the ground where you could be hit by a vehicle,
right?
That's our current day real world fear, right? In this future world, well, you have sensors and things, and a car is not going to hit you because it's going to automatically stop. But still, the separation between the pedestrian and the passenger becomes much more apparent if as you watch the show.
Wow. I didn't realize that either. That's so cool. I definitely want to, this question for what we do and for what you do is so important. So I definitely wanted to make sure to touch on it. And that has to do with public education. PAVE, we're all about educating the public and putting out good information about the technology. We like to work with things like K through 12. We have an essay contest going on and things like that for high school students. As someone in your position who spent a lot of time working on science fiction and imaginative projects, can you talk a little bit about the role that storytelling and the big screen and everything plays in inspiring children to pursue things like STEM? And I hear a lot of stories about people who have seen something even in fiction, but they connect it to this notion that it could be possible or they could do something like that. And you're serving as a really great source of inspiration. Can you talk a little bit about that? And does that ever on your mind when you're designing these things?
No, absolutely. And, I mentioned it earlier that, I was a Cold War kid growing up in the 70s and 80s. I was living off of Star Wars, E.T., and
Right.
2001: A Space Odyssey, right?
Yep.
So this idea was always, present for me growing up of, science fiction, right? Sci-fi. And I like to kind of flip the F and the I. So it's sci-if, like
Okay. I
what
like
if?
that.
And it's because I think good sci-fi, good science fiction, speaking as an artist, as a designer, is really touching on the scientific side of it, right? You have to be cognizant of like I mentioned, what's going on in the world, and the different sort of scientific breakthroughs and technologies, and you have to have this mashup of artistic expression and scientific realization, right? And so when you mention stuff like STEM, I wish there was an A in there for art, because again, my own process as an artist really involves a lot of the technologies of engineering and mathematics and science. And it's kind of a shame to see a lot of those programs disappearing in education system, where because I think to be really good at science, you have to be able to visualize those ideas in some way, whether it's diagrams, drawings, models, and to have the artistic tools and expression to be able to do that, you're able to communicate those ideas and technologies. And inversely, the same thing as an artist. And, in these days, when I say artist or designer, I mean, we're creating our work on, digitally on the computers. We're using tons of different software, whether it's, 3D modeling or 2D drafting or programs like Photoshop, what have you, where, um, you're reliant on these technologies in order to express your idea and your vision. So the science and the art are, to me, always have gone hand in hand, and they're constantly informing each other. And there's a push and pull that I think ultimately should move those disciplines forward.
Absolutely. I think the artistry of today is definitely technology informed, and technology it's used te technology is an integral part of that creative process. And I can tell you, I have personal friends in academia and things like that. I know at the highest levels of academia, they're inspired and they're driven by designs and concepts from these shows. So it's really, I think you're so right. Art is so important. These programs are important, and it's really a circular ecosystem of creation. In my opinion, it all works together. Now,
Absolutely.
yeah. So as we wrap up here, I got to get to one final question, and that's just for you personally. As these technologies come on the market, or if you had the opportunity to ride in an autonomous vehicle, would you take the chance to do so?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a total, geek, right? I mean, I surround myself with technology, like I mentioned, not only in my day-to-day design work, but just in my life. I mean, it's like if you saw my house, everything is automated and voice activated. I can literally turn on my pool and set the heater on it from anywhere in the world using an app on my phone. And I think again, engaging these types of technologies I've always been interested in. Inversely, though, it's like I'm also very much into the tactile experience and you know, the mechanics behind things, and I still really love driving my old car that, you know, has a stick and a clutch and a choke on it, and it's a completely different experience, but I don't think one negates the other. I truly think they inform each other, right? And so so these technologies just in my own life, and I think probably in most people's lives, it's really about how does it adhere to your own personal experience and how does it elevate those experiences, not necessarily remove experiences. So you know, and again, it's what I talk about as being a sort of a responsible designer, responsible artist, is you have to, I think, engage with these technologies and use them. And by doing so, you guide them. The hope is to guide them in the right direction so that they're not misused. You know, like, you know, for instance, right now there's a big debate going on with artificial intelligence image creators, right? And how is that going to change the landscape of not only the whole world, but how art is created and how artists use it, and how non-artists are using it. And so you know, it brings up a lot of interesting and important questions that need to be dealt with. And again, I think the way to do that is to engage with the technology and process it, hopefully in the right way to move it forward.
For sure. Well, I hope that someday in the very near future you get the opportunity to take a ride in a autonomous vehicle, and maybe we'll see some of the positive aspects of these things jump off the screen and into our lives. But regardless, I just want to thank you so much for being with us today. It's such a pleasure to talk with you, and it was really illuminating in terms of the process of bringing that world together and some of the things that you considered. And also, I want to thank our audience, everybody, for spending a few moments of your day with us. Just remember, you can find all of this information on our website at thepavecampaign.org. And we also have this and many other great resources and so many things about AV and an AV future. So thank you all. Thank you, Victor.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Absolutely. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.